All right, so today I want to actually give a presentation about some of my research. It's actually not just mine. It's in collaboration with a pretty large network of researchers that are located pretty much all around the world, USA, Germany, Cyprus, Spain, Greece, France, I think, and so on. So I'd really love to keep this interactive. So, at any time, please stop me and ask me questions, or, just even if you have a comment, I'd love to hear it. So I know it's unfortunate that we can't be physically together in the same room. And so this is a little bit awkward, but I think by now we kind of all got good at doing these virtual things. So hopefully, the awkwardness is a little bit gotten better over the past few months. So I cannot see the chat, I think, in this current view. So just unmute yourself, and if you want, turn on your video. If not, it's perfectly fine. And just talk. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to interrupt me at any point. I actually encourage that. Okay. So any questions before I start? I guess not. Okay. So I'm gonna get started. So I chose this kind of catchy title for this talk, using data science to study jerks on the internet. And I'm unfortunately, in sort of 45 minutes, 1 hour session, I'm not going to be able to actually go in the details of the data science, but hopefully this gives you an overview of the tools that we've been using to study jerks on the internet. And I think this is not really an overstatement. So we've been doing a lot of work and it'll become clear in a couple of minutes, on a very diverse, very broad landscape of what people call online harms, online abuse, cyber safety. I've heard many different sort of definitions, information of weaponization, and so on and so forth. But essentially, it's going to be a number of sort of unwanted activities that happen on the web, in particular on social networks. And we're going to, I'm going to give you an overview of how in the past 4 years or 5 years we've been studying these things. We'll be studying these things. So one sort of warning before I start is that some of the content in this talk might be disturbing, maybe even offensive, and as we take like a scientific approach, and why obviously we don't condone by any means the sort of toxicity and the offense that is in some of the content that I'm going to display, that we found and we study. We took this stance of like not sort of censoring, not filtering this, to kind of give you the whole picture. So I apologize in advance. This is not sort of an easy choice, but for one, when you do this kind of work, it's actually very hard to draw a line of what constitutes like sort of toxic speech or offensive speech. So first of all, and this is actually sort of an interesting angle of this line of work, is that toxicity, abuse, or hate speech is kind of very contextual and very subjective. So obviously there are things that are sort of universally considered offensive, but others maybe are a little bit more subjective, right? So it's, and in fact, when you ask human annotators, so like when you, for instance, report a post on Facebook or on Twitter as potentially harmful or toxic, there is some machine learning that goes on to see if that post is indeed toxic or harmful. But in some cases, it goes to a human annotator that has to make a decision, right? And in fact, they ask more than one annotator because a lot of times they don't agree. So they take like a majority vote. So deciding what is toxic is actually not not trivial at all. So we take this stance of like showing stuff as it is. For this reason, if any of you want to just walk out and just sort of disconnect, I obviously don't take any offense on that. So just beware. All right, so what do jerks on the internet do? So what kind of things are important to study, and what kind of things we study in our research? And there's really a whole field of researchers worldwide that really dedicated their career and their life in some cases at studying these things. So you can think about things like cyberbullying or cyber aggression, or hate speech in general. So where the main difference between like hate speech and cyberbullying is that in cyberbullying you usually have repeated abuse. So it's many times there is sort of an effort that is targeted at a specific a group of people, or some even like a single person that has some kind of attribute, let's say, that sort of triggers, that justifies, quote unquote, the bullying online. So that's really this repeated action that is much more detrimental, much more hurtful for the victim than, let's say, a sporadic single kind of hate speech offense that might happen, right? And in fact, there are coordinated hate campaigns, and I hope I will have time to give some example of what happens where some communities online, they actually get together, they coordinate like some hate campaigns. So they usually use one platform to say, okay, let's go and attack this person on Twitter or on YouTube. And so they coordinate the hate so that it comes from multiple places, from multiple users at the same time. So the victim is really overwhelmed by this. Obviously, there is other issues like radicalization, misogyny, so things that are sort of, again, organized and facilitated by online platforms and social networks, and things that are very much in the news, like misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, and overall conspiracy theories, and things that get a little bit more political. Okay, so why do we care about these things? And a lot of times, unfortunately, especially when we started doing this work, and I was talking to colleagues or I was giving talks, people tend to underestimate the impact of these issues on the web. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that if a problem doesn't affect them directly, then it's not a problem, right? And they think that all of these things can somewhat be mitigated by simply disconnecting, right? So you don't want to get bullied, well, don't cyberbullied, don't go online. Well, that's not really first of all, a very constructive sort of societal approach, but it's also not really feasible for many people, and especially now in the pandemic, right, where they really rely on a social network as an integral part of their lives, right? So you see things like people, and unfortunately, a lot of this has disproportionately affected minorities, women, and so on. So like being really forced off a platform, right? So this is the case of sort of a famous US comedian, American comedian, Leslie Jones. You see things like conspiracy theories that actually go mainstream and might even affect elections. So this was an example from the previous US elections where a 4chan conspiracy that started claiming that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats were running a pedophile ring from a pizzeria, so that's why it's called Pizzagate. So actually went mainstream, and it did influence some people in the way they voted. And in fact, even one guy went to this pizzeria and started shooting people. Okay, and in fact, you see a lot of these abuse and this toxicity and this hate that is not really confined on social networks. So just saying, okay, just don't go on social networks doesn't really solve the problem. When this violence, when this hate and this toxicity spills off in the real world, and you see a lot of people that actually have committed mass shooting and mass murdering, they were radicalized online. Just today, I didn't have time to add this to the slides, but just today, the New Zealand government released a report on the Christchurch mosque shooting. So many people got killed, and they found that the perpetrator was actually radicalized online, and particularly on YouTube. Okay, and there are many other examples, that again, there's a show this relationship between what happens online and what happens in the real world. So you might have heard of Russian interference or other countries' interference in the U.S. elections or Brexit referendum, and many other things. Right. So I hope you agree with me that these things are important to study, to understand, so that we can better find ways as a society, not just as computer scientists, but with the help of people with other expertise, from political science to anthropology, psychology, social science, and law, policy, and so on. We can hopefully mitigate some of the issues. So the first step is really to understand. Right. So now, again, coming back to the computer science part, what can we do about this thing? So there is actually, this kind of activity started to really become a problem, sort of for masses, like really have a visual, strong, deep effect on society only in the past maybe 4 or 5 years. Not that people weren't affected before, but it really came into sort of the forefront. But before that, for like 10, 15 years, as computer scientists, we have done a lot of work on mitigating unwanted activities on the web, and in particular on social networks. So, for instance, like one classic example is that we're very good at detecting spam. Right. So, if you go on your junk folders or spam folders on Gmail, you might very likely find hundreds of emails there that are correctly classified as spam. Right. So this is great. Right. You don't see spam much. Personally, I get a spam email maybe once a week or once a month, even sometimes, and there are very few emails that are mislabeled as spam in my spam folder. So it's really great, right? I think spam has been fighting spam has been a success for the most part, and the same can be said for bot activity in social media. So bots is like automated scripts that can be used to automate activity. Okay, and this kind of activity we can detect it pretty easily as well. Why? Because there are some signals, there are some patterns that are easy to recognize. So activities made by bots is usually large scale, it's synchronized, so you can see sort of timing patterns, right? So, you instruct a bot to, tweet, to post something, every hour or every day at 8 a.m. or something, right? Or, you really see a coordinated effort by a botnet, so a network of bots. So you can really see these patterns also, not only from a time point of view, but also from a spatial point of view and from a sort of social graph point of view. So the connection between these different accounts. And in fact, if you're interested in learning more about this line of work, these are sort of products that are they're out there, open source, Synchrotrap, Evil Cohort. Synchrotrap is actually deployed by Facebook to detect this kind of activities. Evil Cohort is deployed on Twitter. Botometer is actually something that is user facing. So you can search Botometer and you can give them the username of a Twitter account, and the website returns like the probability that account is a bot. So it's an automated script. There is no human user, no human person behind that account. So, but this doesn't really apply, unfortunately, to human activity, right? So, a lot of the issues that I described before, like cyberbullying and so on, is not really done by bots. And in fact, there has been studies that show that even these activities, political activities, election interference, disinformation, misinformation, is not so much spread by bots, but by humans that have like an incentive or are paid to do that. And these humans are not machines. Okay, maybe there are some exceptions of some people that really act like machines, but overall human activities is not really coordinated, right? So those signals, those patterns, they're not really they don't really stand out much. So, the things that we learn on detecting bots or even detecting spam don't apply. Why is Gmail very good at detecting spam? Well, because it really is able to, Gmail is able to recognize these patterns in the synchronization of emails that are sent to many Gmail users at the same time or in sort of recognizable time patterns, and that's why they're able to do correct classification of emails. So that's not great, and spam is usually thought, or other sort of mitigation of unwanted activity is thought on economic grounds. So when things like automated activity, for instance, for denial service attacks, or even if people want to buy a lot of tickets for a festival, well, this is in the past, unfortunately. We really miss going to concerts and festivals. So what happens is usually you have to solve a CAPTCHA, right? So there's really annoying numbers that you have to type, or you have to recognize a picture of a traffic signal or mountains and so on, right? So this is all because you're trying to fight the adversary, the attacker, on economic grounds. So we make it costly for the adversary to do denial of service attack. You make it costly to send spam, or you make it not profitable. So if you send spam but nobody clicks on it, essentially you're not making any money off spam, right? So that sort of turns away the attacker, the adversary, so that they will go and do their wanted activity somewhere else. So this doesn't really apply, again, for the things that I mentioned before, because first of all, state level adversaries have deep pockets, so they can pay people to solve CAPTCHAs, and it's people don't bully other people because of money, right? They do it because of maybe ideology or some other crazy things that goes on in their mind. Okay, so we can't really do much on this. And sort of this really motivated a lot of work. So this was kind of like an open research problem, a new thing. How do we go about these things? So another observation that we have to make is that online services do not exist in a vacuum, right? So you have social networks, like say Twitter, Facebook, or 4chan, Reddit, and so on. So they're not isolated animals, right? So whatever, you see a lot of things on Facebook that come from Twitter. And I'm not saying just like reposting material or adding a link on Facebook of a tweet, right, or embedding a tweet, right? So it's actually the fact that there is content generated from a social network that eventually becomes mainstream and spills on other platforms. So I have users that monitor, let's say Donald Trump Twitter account, and they post it and they discuss it on other platforms as well, right? So we cannot study these kind of unwanted activities, what jerks do, on a single platform. We have to consider like an ecosystem. We have to consider these things, how these things are interconnected with each other. And again, this poses a very challenging, very important research problem, because that's much harder to kind of have like this holistic view of different platforms, right? And same can be said by on let's say video and picture platforms, or news and so on and so forth. So we can't look at single services at the time. Also, that there is another thing that we have to take into account is that there are, let's consider social networks, right? So you have mainstream famous social networks like Facebook, Twitter, and maybe Reddit, right, is one of the most visited websites in the world. But then you also have fringe communities, right? So you have these platforms like 4chan. I'm going to talk about 4chan quite a lot today, which is considered fringe. It's a sort of small community of users it's not really mainstream, and it's really weird place. It's a really toxic place. And you might think, okay, who cares about what happens on 4chan, right? As long as I don't go on 4chan, I don't get exposed to their toxicity and to their, what happens there, right? But again, that's not really the case, and I think I'll show you some examples later. So there is a lot of content that originates from 4chan, but then gets to other platforms like Twitter and Facebook, right? So we can't ignore it. Okay. And same applies to Reddit, right? So you have sort of mainstream subreddits. I don't know if you're familiar with Reddit, but it's organized in sort of communities like the subreddits. So you have some mainstream ones, but very much some fringe ones. So periodically, some they get banned, they get quarantined, and so on. But there is a lot of weird stuff happening on Reddit as well. So with my colleagues, we founded this iDrama lab. It's an international network of researchers. And like I said, we really use data science, or in other words, computational methods, to understand and mitigate information weaponization. So all of these unwanted activities at a large scale. So there is, we rely a lot on the power of big data to analyze complex and intertwined communities, again, starting from the data, and hopefully building proactive and preventive systems to counter information weaponization. So things like cyberbullying and so on and so forth. Okay, so this means that we have to, our approach based on data science, so data first, right? So we have to collect data, and that's actually very, very difficult. So we need to crawl. We have to get data sets from a bunch of websites. So we've been collecting data from 4chan, from Reddit, Gab, Twitter, YouTube. Unfortunately, not so much from Facebook, because just data collection from Facebook is very hard. There is no sort of available API for researchers to get data. Facebook makes it extremely hard, especially after the Cambridge Analytica scandal to get data. But we're talking really about terabytes of data every day that we get. So we have to process this data, we have to clean it, we have to store it securely, we have to index it. So it's a very, very complex task that is really not very common in research or in academia, right? So and we're very proud that we built this infrastructure. Okay, if you're want to work with us, do some kind of projects, there is plenty of stuff that we can do together. So then you get the data, and then we use data science, like I said. So statistical tools, probability theory, clustering, collection, contextual, and so on and so forth. So a lot of different tools to analyze this data, and the kind of analysis that we do can be either exploratory. So let's say there is a new social network that comes out, and say, okay, let's see what's going on here. So you kind of explore things, or hypothesis driven, right? So there is a lot of literature from, let's say, the social sciences, psychology, political science, and so on, that say people get polarized on social networks because 1, 2, 3, right? And then we say, okay, let's check, right? So we have an hypothesis and we test it, right? So scientific method, right? And all of our code is open source. It's available to all researchers online. And we make it easier for people to sort of reproduce, not only reproduce our work, but also do more research, and especially for social scientists who do not have the expertise or the infrastructure to collect data, right? So we can give them to them. In some cases, not always, because obviously there are data protection and ethics restrictions, but in some cases we are able to get this data and then release it further. Okay, so I already mentioned a couple of times, this 4chan. So why do we care about 4chan, right? So there are things like that came from 4chan, like a lot of memes, the anonymous hacker network, really the concept of trolling to some extent has been perfected by 4chan. But in the past few years, 4chan has really become sort of a very toxic place, and especially some boards. I'll tell you in a second. And so we have memes like Pepe the Frog, which is actually been associated to the far right and the alt-right, the far right communities, and has been designated as a symbol of hate. And again, you see things coming from 4chan that go mainstream. So like, for instance, Donald Trump retweeted a meme of himself looking like Pepe the Frog, and 4chan really played a very important role in especially in the 2016 U.S. presidential elections, to the point that they sort of claimed that they made Trump win the election. So what do we care about 4chan? So I already told you about Leslie Jones. There was these chatbots that Microsoft released. They quickly turn it to be racist. Like, the chatbot will start saying, the Holocaust didn't happen and other kind of things. Okay, so 4chan is an image board forum. There are boards. You can create a new thread in the board by making a post with an image attached, and other users can reply. So these are, the boards at the time. So one particularly interesting one is called Poll, the politically incorrect board. Pretty much everything goes on Poll. There is no moderation. So, and I think there is really, with the exception of child pornography, you can post anything you want, unless it's, it's deemed off topic. There's two important properties of 4chan. So one is anonymity. So you don't have to register an account. Anonymity is the default behavior. So you just go and post. If you want, obviously you can sign your post, but there is no authentication. And the other one is ephemerality. So all threads get archived after a while, and after a week, everything is deleted, right? And this, it means that this affects a lot the discussions that are there. So you just post everything knowing that it will be deleted. So it's actually, from research point of view, it's not easy to study 4chan. So it's, the anonymity and ephemerality features create some hurdles, if anything, for the data collection part. I already mentioned that, you should not think, okay, 4chan is just, sort of a fringe community of like losers or whatever, right? So you actually, a lot of the activities are sort of spilled on other platforms. There is sort of a lingo that is specific to, for instance, boards like Poll. So knowing what they're talking about is not easy. It really requires you to immerse in that. So really spend time looking at those posts, which is not easy, right? It's very disturbing. And sometimes, we've done a lot of research on 4chan, and that's been covered by the press. And, we've given interviews with the BBC, or newspapers have written about this research. And, the 4chan users have found it and they've attacked us. So if I have time, I'll show you some example at the end of the talk of how we've been attacked or doxxed even. Okay, so let's just give you an example of one study that we've done on 4chan. So we collected, millions of posts in 2016. And this wasn't easy. So we had to, because everything gets deleted, so we had to go and check each thread every 5 minutes and wait until the thread gets archived, and then retrieve the full content. And we still have this data. So I think by now we have close to 1 billion posts. So there is a lot of hate speech on this. So just sort of a keyword search. So a keyword search pattern matching shows like a really high percentage of really hate speech, very disturbing. And these percentages are really high. So if you compare it to like Twitter or even Reddit, they're like orders of magnitude higher. So very disturbing, right? And one thing that I already mentioned is that how 4chan acts in some cases as a place to coordinate a raid, coordinate a hate campaign on other platforms like YouTube. So how does this work? So a user posts a link to a YouTube video and says something like, what to do, or actively call for the community to go and attack the person that posted the YouTube video. And in many cases, these are minorities or activists, so pretty disturbing. And the thread on 4chan becomes an aggregation point for raiders. And so we use data science to understand this phenomenon and actually detect it. Okay, so one hypothesis that we had is that, okay, if this is happening, you would see you will see a peak in YouTube comments while the thread is alive. So one thing that I actually forgot to say is that all threads have a limited lifetime on 4chan. After a while, the thread, you cannot longer post on the thread, and it gets archived. And like I said, after a week, completely deleted. Okay, and so we cannot actually see the synchronization between the thread on Poll on 4chan and the comments on YouTube. And this is actually an example of something that happened to me. Okay, I was actually giving a talk about 4chan and the study that we did, and we put it on YouTube. so someone asked me, there was one of these conferences, I think it was during, it was snowing, and they said many people couldn't attend, and they asked us to record the video and put it online on YouTube. Okay, so then I gave an interview, and to, I don't remember who, and then they asked me, do you have like videos or presentations about this? And I said, okay, here is a video on YouTube. And so, the article covering our work links to the YouTube video. Well, long story short, 4chan users found the YouTube video and went into the comments, and in just like 10, 15 minutes, I was overwhelmed. The video was overwhelmed with a lot of toxic comments. So you can see like 11,000 views. I assure you, no professor ever gives a talk on computer science, at least gives a talk on YouTube, puts a talk of theirs on YouTube and gets 10,000 views. Okay, this clearly something was going on, and there were like hundreds of very disturbing comments on that. So how can we do this detection, right? So if you consider time zero, the time when the YouTube link was posted on 4chan, you can actually start seeing what are the comments that get on there, right? So you can see this peak, right? So for instance, 14% of videos see peak commenting activities during poll thread lifetime. Okay, so you can see this. You can just count how many comments are there over time. So you can actually measure synchronization. So here's an example of like 2 time series, red one and a green one. You can see they're like shifted from each other by 0.2 seconds on average. So you can plot the lag, and you can see that the curve, you have a peak of a density curve of 0.2 seconds. So you can measure, what is the synchronization between comments on YouTube and comments on 4chan. Okay, so we can actually plot it, and we can see that not only these comments are synchronized, but also that whenever the thread on poll is active, the comments on YouTube have hate, so have hateful keywords, and these are the red dots. Okay, so this is very important, and actually allows us to detect these raids in real time. So we actually used here deep learning and an ensemble classifier to even predict what YouTube videos are at risk of being raided. And so you can flag it to the content creators, and YouTube can put some extra defenses for these videos. And we have actually very, very good accuracy. Okay, 94% accuracy. Fortunately, I don't have time to give the details of that. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is how these platforms influence each other. And so one way to look at this is how content, for instance, comes from 4chan and ultimately gets on Twitter. So here's, for instance, a picture of the US senator having coffee with Putin, and Trump then tweeted that this senator was friends with Russia. And that other things like the famous, there was a famous meme again tweeted by Trump. Again, this came from a fringe subreddit called the Donald online, and there's many other examples. Okay, so we try to use data science to quantify this influence, for instance, with respect to fake news, to disinformation. And let me just go a little bit fast here. So we use that a statistics method called Hawkes processes, which actually allows you to quantify the effect that one event has on the other. So you can sort of, think about causation, not just correlation of things. And that's really, really, really interesting. So here's an example, okay? So you imagine there is an event, so like a posting of some fake news on Twitter. This creates an impact on Reddit and poll on 4chan, for instance. And then something else happens on Reddit. This creates an impulse on Twitter and poll, and so on and so forth, right? So the Hawkes process allow you to quantify these things and actually take into account what we call the background noise, which is something that happens regardless of what happens on other platforms. Okay, and I'll just show you the results. So here we actually can have a measure of influence of things. So, for instance, we see that these fringe communities like 4chan or these fringe subreddits have a lot of influence in pushing this information on mainstream social networks like Twitter. Okay, so that's very, very important. So what does it mean? That a lot of sort of conspiracy theories and URLs of some fringe news websites that nobody has heard of first gets to 4chan, and then because it's been posted on 4chan, sort of spills on other platforms. Okay, so I'm sorry I didn't give the details, but we're sort of running out of time. So the last thing actually that I wanted to cover is like our work on memes. Okay, so we all think that memes are fun. You see sort of a lot of cool things. I follow this account on Instagram, UCL memes. It's pretty fun, but unfortunately, memes can also be not fun at all. So I already mentioned Paper the Frog is a symbol of hate. You see, Paper the Frog being sort of variants of it with very, very disturbing things, anti-Semitic very often. You see things like getting on, sort of on the political ground. There was again a shooter that had a van full of 4chan memes before he actually went and shot people. So there is what we call weaponized memes. That's a problem, and we want to study. So we did a very large scale study of memes. So we collected 160 million images from websites like Twitter, Reddit, and 4chan, and we clustered images that were similar to each other and annotated them in an automated way using the website Know Your Meme. It's sort of an encyclopedia of memes, okay? And then so we could really understand what memes are posted on these different networks, okay? So here are some examples. Here are some clusters of political memes, some stuff about Trump and Hillary and Hitler, some stuff about Brexit and so on. Okay, so we found really disturbing things, as you can imagine. Top memes on places like Twitter, are maybe not necessarily disturbing. On things like on 4chan, very anti-Semitic. On Reddit, also you feel there are kind of not so fun memes. So here's examples of the top memes, some more details of top memes per community. So you can see a lot of sort of disturbing things as well. So we also have some very cool visualization tools to put these clusters. So there is, I'll send the slides later. So there's links to our paper or to a website where you can actually browse these memes. So it's sort of interactive thing of this graph, and you can find all these different variants of memes. Okay, so let me skip this. Okay, so. Right. So overall, overall, the main findings of overall, we talked a little bit about sort of this data science approach of studying information weaponization. And there's a lot more things that I didn't have time to present, but also wanted to share the fact that we actually spent a lot of time looking at sort of what jerks do on the web, and it's kind of very sad that the web has such a powerful technology, and especially now we all appreciate it during the pandemic, the fact that we can still study, we can still work, we can still interact with people, but unfortunately there is a lot of really bad stuff happening, right? And as researchers, we want to share what we learn, we want to understand these things, we try to mitigate it. We write papers, we write blogs. It's part of our job actually to sort of do dissemination of our research, making it accessible to, let's say, the general population, right? So we give interviews, networks, journalists and so on periodically ask us to talk about this stuff, and this attracts some unwanted attention. So this, in fact, is a 4chan thread about our work, and you can see they actually went through to the trouble of actually looking for us online and find all the information about us. So some very disturbing things, especially for a colleague of mine that, as a minority, comes from Nigeria and was really targeted in particular. But even for myself, they found a lot of information. There are other things where they even, found my phone number, UCL phone number, and the address. So I got a little bit scared, to be honest. And you see a lot of disturbing things. They even turned us into memes. So this is, my colleague Gianluca Stringini was at UCL up to a couple of years ago. Now he's a professor at Boston University. So he gave an interview to Nature, and then they turned this picture into some sort of meme on 4chan. They again, anti-Semitism unfortunately is a very prominent thing happening on 4chan. And unfortunately, this was actually made appeared first on a website called Daily Stormer, which is literally a neo-Nazi community, and then it went to 4chan. So here is another colleague of mine, Jeremy Blackburn, who's a professor at University of Binghamton in New York, and he actually came to UCL. This is a UCL room, Mallet Place, which I never thought I would miss so much. And so this is giving a talk, and someone posted a picture on Twitter, and they turned again this into a meme. So these things actually recur. So it was not just a one-time thing. Here's another colleague of mine, Sara Zanetu, is a researcher at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. They turned him to Pepe the Frog meme. This is called a comfy Pepe. And so they put his face on instead of Pepe's face. So moving forward, there's actually still many problems remaining in the broad space. We've made a lot of progress into gaining a sort of a quantitative or large-scale understanding of some of them, but now is really the time to deploy proactive system in production. I gave you one example of the real-time detection of raids, but we can't do this alone. So at the very least, we have to collaborate with policy makers and look at also ways to make social networks and platforms accountable for their action. Yeah, so that's it. I think we still have 10 minutes or so for a discussion, questions. I'll be happy to send you links, and there is much more that I didn't talk about.